We're on. So, a couple of things I want to do today with you guys. Obviously, I want to talk about some of the art in chapter 22. And Izzy, I'm correct, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Everybody account. Thank you. Obviously, I want to talk about this Renaissance and mannerism, and I want to talk about quiz one, which I'm going to spring on you today, and it's kind of a work our way into writing about art, and so I have some kind of pointers on how to do some of that before I just spring it on you. And so, review. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about to start with is that through art, we can kind of tell a lot more about where this art was made, more than just the subject matter itself. You can tell a lot of things. And I'm on this because I just read this a little while ago. There was some research done about Monet. You guys know Monet? We're going to look at Monet here in the course. He's the guy that did the big water lilies. That's at the St. Louis Art Museum. And he is what is known as an impressionist. And during his career, he moved to London for a short while, for a period of about a year and a half or so. And he made paintings of London. And even though he was an impressionist, those paintings are like way off the scale impressionist. They're kind of foggy, they're kind of dense, they're not sharp and crisp. And so the research that was done on this was that some people looked at the letters he wrote to his wife back in France. And he was talking about how dirty the air was in London. That's why these paintings are so indistinct. They're like Impressionism on top of Impressionism. It's hard to make out the imagery. And he was talking about how bad the air was. And if you know about London, roughly 1900, you'll know that people heated their homes by burning coal. They had stove furnaces, kind of things. And in fact, in St. Louis, we did the same thing. And if you take a look at old houses, they have a coal chute. And the guy would come by and deliver the coal, and it would slide down this, what looked like exactly like a playground slide. It would slide down into the basement, and you'd shovel the coal into the furnace to keep your house warm. And if you're in some of the old neighborhoods like Soulard in those places, some of those coal chutes are still intact. So anyway, but all of the industry was powered by coal. Coal was the original fossil fuel. And London was a big city. They kept their houses warm, a lot of industry. This is the beginning of the carbon footprint that we talk about today. But at any rate, we never really quite understood why those London paintings from Monet were so different. And researchers, through digging around at the artifacts, figured it out. So the air quality at turn of the 19th or the 20th century was really very poor. And as I read that, I found out, or I remembered, I should say, remembered about another painter from England, and he painted about 75 years before Monet, so early 1800s. We'll look at this guy too. His name was John Constable. And he lived out in the countryside, the English countryside, and he painted these wonderful landscapes with the farmers bringing in the hay and nice, beautiful, sunny skies. And they used Constable's painting to figure out what the weather patterns were. Before all of this coal polluted everything in London. And in fact, they used the paintings along with tree rings and other things. And Constable was such a good painter and had such a sharp eye, he actually painted those clouds perfectly. Somebody in meteorology could look at those and say, these are cirrus clouds, these are cumulus clouds, it's whatever, you know. And so anyway, made me even think of something else that we looked at in ADAH 100. And we looked at the art of Mesopotamia. And we looked at Sumerian, Babylonian cultures, Akkadian, I should say, cultures. And there was an emperor named Ashurbanipal. There was a great king in the ancient world. And one of the things that he commissioned was these low relief sculptures, these images of Ashurbanipal hunting lions. And there he is with his sword facing down these ferocious beast. Showed that he was kingly, that he was manly, that he was powerful. But if you take a close look at the lions, they don't look like lions we see today. In fact, what he was slaying and the artist captured were wonderful images of Asiatic lions that don't exist anymore, probably because they got hunted out. But anyway, there's all kinds of stuff that you can learn by looking at the artwork. And why am I going on about this? Because we looked at Renaissance art, at least the 1400s, and we could kind of trace a lot of their technology, a lot of their science and math. And oftentimes you can trace what they know about human physiology as well. And you can go back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, and the Greeks were really big on physiology. In fact, that's really the Hippocratic Oath comes from ancient Greece. Do no harm. But bottom line is they understand how the human body works, how the muscles work, how the skeleton supports the muscles, all of this stuff. And you see these wonderful classical Greek sculptures that look almost hyper real because they understood anatomy way beyond the people that came up. So anyway, we saw a lot of developments in the 14th century. And what we see here in the early 15th century is what they did with all of that knowledge. And so this is Rome, there's Vatican, and this is kind of an interesting political issue here. And we saw a lot of the work from the Italian Renaissance come out of Florence and a few other places like Siena, Urbino, and other small city-states. Rome consolidates the power. The power sits right here with the Vatican. And so what the Pope does, what the church does, is that they start bringing all of these artists from those places like Florence, and they bring them down to Rome and say, "I'm the Pope. You got to make art for us." And so anyway, here's a slide. It's not a very good slide, but I did get this off of what's that thing called? The internet. Anyway, I was telling you about all of the orthogonals, the lines that all converge at the vanishing point with 1 point perspective. And I was showing you how all of the lines converge on Jesus here, Masaccio's tribute money. So anyway, and I got this. La Vite. And anybody read Italian? I don't. Sorry to say. But this means the lives of the most excellent architects, painters, pittori, painters, and sculptors. This is like the first art history book, and it's written by a guy named Giorgio Vasari. And here is the page here with Leonardo da Vinci. And he's a painter and a sculptor. And I don't know what the fior means, but he did everything else too. Bottom line, there he is, Giorgio Vasari, the first art history. So why is that important? Well, for centuries upon centuries, often we don't know who the artists are. And with the Renaissance and with humanism, we start to kind of pay more attention to who these artists are. And in Northern Europe and in Southern Europe. So I didn't have any anonymous works here. They were all done by people like Jan van Eyck, Donatello, Masaccio, people. So we know who they are. And I'll go back here. Actually, Vasari writes about a lot of these people. And it was kind of like People magazine in a kind of a way, because he talked about what they did. And Vasari was a painter himself, so he kind of appreciated what these artists did. But it was kind of like People magazine too. 16th century People magazine. And he talks about Masaccio, the guy with the tribute money, this guy. And he was quite a live wire. He was always getting into drunken brawls. He was always fighting, ended up in jail, ended up just ill-behaved. A crazy man, if you will. But it also talks about Masaccio's accomplishments and the works that he did and the people who influenced him. So, like I say, it's the first art history book. And so it's no accident I showed you Leonardo da Vinci. And why I was talking about all of this stuff that you can find out about what scientific, cultural, mathematical knowledge they had in their day. And nobody epitomizes that more than Leonardo da Vinci. This is one of his early works, and you see it's Milan. This is before the Pope started grabbing all the artists and bringing them to Rome. And this is oil on wood transferred to canvas. You know they do that? This was painted on wood, and somewhere along the line, I don't know the provenance of this particular piece, but oil paint dries solid, dries hard. And it creates a film, and it's a film that sticks together so much, it's almost like peeling a sticker off a hard surface. And so anyway, that's what happened here. And they put it on canvas. I have no idea why they would put it on canvas. But I do know that we'll start seeing a lot more paintings on canvas as we move forward. In fact, that becomes almost the standard. Before this, we saw Masaccio. That's a fresco. That's stuck on the wall. That's permanent. It's not going anywhere. Canvas. You can hang this wherever you like. And canvas is lightweight as well. So it's much more portable. So anyway, this is part of what's happened. Leonardo, Madonna of the Rocks. And you see here, it's like a cave, right? You can see it's pretty easily understood. And got the angel, got the Christ, the blessing, the Madonna. We believe this to be St. John the Baptist. And according to many of the beliefs, John the Baptist was actually a cousin of Jesus, and they were contemporaries. And so anyway, but what they have here is a religious painting, but it's also kind of a study in light and darkness. And this is kind of in its own way the opposite of what a painter would typically do. He's created all of this dark space that's in front and light coming up from the back. That's kind of a neat trick, especially if you're doing painting and you're trying to create the illusion of space. So this has to be all correct with all of the other indicators here. And one of them is this. I was just talking about fog. This is atmospheric perspective. It's something that Leonardo discovered or was given credit for. And that is that as things recede into the background, they become less distinct. You can't see as clearly, not as in sharp focus, which is how we see things. Cameras have kind of changed some of that, but bottom line, that's how he makes this light area appear to be in the background. We understand this. It doesn't look like a bit of white or light paint painted over the top. Sharp eye, understanding atmosphere, understanding optics, understanding how we perceive things. And here is, they call this a cartoon. Let me see if I can get there. There you go. And Madonna and child with Saint Anne and the infant Saint John. Here we go. It's not John the Baptist, by the way. But what they do in a lot of these religious paintings is that they kind of play a little fast and loose with the history. They'll put contemporary people like right there at the foot of the cross of the dying Jesus. You know, these things don't follow history or even biblical stories per se, but a cartoon. That was always, at least for all of these centuries, was meant to mean a drawing. A cartoon was a drawing, and it was a mock-up for a painting. Not like what we use the word for today on the Cartoon Network, SpongeBob and all that stuff. Anyway, but you can see Leonardo could draw and it's not entirely complete here, but this, put a star by it. The Last Supper, one of Da Vinci's most famous paintings, and it's oil and tempera on plaster. And it's at the Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, which is a monastery. And you see this part here? That's a doorway. And it's a doorway into the cafeteria of this monastery. The monks would go in here to have their meals. And they commissioned Leonardo to paint the Last Supper. And it's just a simple reminder that when they break bread and when they eat, reminder of what Jesus went through, the Last Supper. And so this is probably the most famous Last Supper painting ever in history. And for most people, when they think of the Last Supper, the image that comes up is this one. That's kind of a big thing too, because all of the stuff we'll see now is almost everything of Western art. So Leonardo da Vinci, Last Supper, oil and tempera. Told you, Da Vinci was a scientist. And everything he did had some kind of scientific underpinning. And the underpinning here, well, you can talk about some things here, like how those perspective lines come there right above the head of the Christ, you know, it's like Masaccio. So he understands that. But oil and tempera, those two kinds of paint don't really go together very well. Oil paint does not really mix with anything else. If you are an oil painter, you know what I mean. Oil is oil-based. Tempera is a water-based. You know what happens with oil and water? They separate. You pour oil into a pot of water. Oil will flow. Separates. It does not mix. But at any rate, Da Vinci was trying to come up with a new kind of paint. That's the scientific experiment that's going on with this painting. And so that's why it's in such poor condition, because this is one of the experiments that didn't quite work out. And so this is the restored version. And like we'll see with a lot of these, with some of these paintings and sculptures, people had paid a lot of money to get these paintings, mostly paintings, restored to their original glory. And that's what you're looking at here. And here are the orthogonals. The horizon line, everything converges on Jesus. And you can see in its original state was really even more impressive than this. You can see how all of that paint is just kind of flaked off and faded and deteriorating. This is what it looked like originally. And so that restoration, I think, had been finished like maybe 10 years ago. And there's the door, you see. We talked about this a little bit, the idea of making a landscape, of creating flesh that actually looks like flesh instead of a hard object. It reflects light, it absorbs light. Got a question? Any of you seen Glass Onion on Netflix? Yeah. Well, anyway, it's not a spoiler alert, but this painting plays a role in this film, and they refer to it as the most valuable painting in Western civilization. Say, not something I made up. But Glass Onion, it's a pretty cool movie. It's a whodunit murder mystery kind of thing. Got some twists and turns, and anyway. But if you want to talk about the artwork that represents or epitomizes Western culture, you're talking about Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. Those three. Leonardo da Vinci, fetus and lining of the universe. Uterus. I'm getting way too expansive here, sorry. In fact, that's what I wanted to, that was what was on my mind here. This expanded view, this exploded view, the lining of the uterus, and as I was saying about the ancient Greeks, they understood anatomy like way beyond their predecessors. Da Vinci, a scientist and a physician as well. And so he's got this embryo, this fetus, and he's drawn this, and his drawings are so accurate, you could use these in medical school today. I mean, they're really that exact. But he invented this here. We don't know of anybody who had ever done this before, and that is this cutaway view. We're kind of used to that right now. You open it up to show what's inside, and it's as though there'd been somebody take a scalpel and cut the uterus open and pull it apart. That was a device invented, a visual device invented by Da Vinci to show you the inside of something. Instead of having two separate drawings or see-through, he had a cutaway version. And so he's got all of this stuff, the fallopian tubes and all different kinds of things going on. What he understood about gestation, fertilization, childbirth, all of this stuff. And guess what? If the Pope would have caught him doing that, lights out, as they say. Why? Because it was sacrilegious. You don't do that to dead bodies. Certainly don't do it to live bodies either, but the idea that it's quite likely that Da Vinci got a fresh corpse of a recently deceased pregnant woman, got the grave robbers to dig her up out of the ground and put her on the table and start dissecting her. You guys have had biology class and the frogs and stuff. But you didn't do this with people. So anyway, he was risking his life quite literally for science. And it was something that was a mystery for a long time. I'm going to zoom in on this because it's hard to tell from where you're at. There's his notes. This is like genius secret code stuff. It's written in 16th century Italian, but it's written backwards. And you have to hold this up to the mirror to be able to read it, which was a way that Da Vinci was trying to protect himself from people either A, stealing his ideas, or B, figuring out what he was actually doing and off to jail. And so anyway, Da Vinci was really what we call in this day and age, the Renaissance man. did it all. And this is another one that is famous Da Vinci. He didn't really do a whole lot of artwork. So like a lot of what we get as examples of his artwork are really his scientific notes. But Vitruvian Man, ink on paper. And this is really just kind of well, it's become a symbol for this phrase that kind of guided the Renaissance. Man is the measure of all things. That's the humanism that I've been talking about. That's something that started 100 years ago, and it's really come to full fruition in the 16th century. Man as the measure of all things. And this is a superimposed perfect circle and a perfect square, and having the man actually as conforming to this perfect geometry, but man as the measure of all things. That's something that hadn't happened since ancient Greece. And what do I mean by that? Is that the human mind discerns meaning. Human mind is what measures all things. Before this time, or at least for a couple of thousand of years in Western civilization, this idea that God was the measure of all things. God created the universe. God made everything perfect. God made everything with a particular purpose. God was the measure of all things. And so you would take things written in the Bible quite literally. Say, like, the earth was at the center of the universe. The idea that it would revolve around the sun, that was not true then. But this is where that science really starts to catch up, and it creates problems, and especially for a lot of these Italian scientists. Galileo comes 100 years later. He gets in a lot of trouble with the church over figuring out how the planetary system works and stuff like that. Anyway, and I'll zoom in again, written backwards. Save. And Leonardo was an architect. And this is plans for a church. I don't think it was ever built, but this is, as you can see, it's still written backwards, but he had these designs for how to not only design the building, but how to make them architecturally much more sound, that they would be stronger, they would last longer, they would be more beautiful, etc., etc. And so this is from Giorgio Vasari's Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects. Vasari, when I showed you that, in a lot of what these guys did, there wasn't really, some of these did everything. Da Vinci was a scientist. He was an architect, as I showed you the plans earlier. He was a physician. He did sculpture as well. And he designed some, how should I say it? Back in the day of city-states, small cities had to defend themselves against roaming invaders that would come in and take everything they had. I showed you earlier some of the walls that would surround the city and stuff. Da Vinci actually designed fortifications and weaponry for these small places to defend themselves. So he was a military guy too, on top of everything. It says, This is Raphael, and here he is. This is the marriage of the Virgin, and there's Joseph, and there's the Virgin Mary. This looks similar to a painting that we saw earlier. What Raphael does is that he kind of takes some of the things that were invented during the 15th century and really just refines these things in the 16th. And so anyway, but Raphael's primarily a painter. There's the previous one, Perugino, delivering the keys of the kingdom to St. Peter, and you see that. And this is the Raphael. And it's pretty much the same, except he kind of cuts it off and creates, would you say, a tighter composition. He kind of hacks it all in. It's kind of more of a modern thing rather than something that comes out as a lengthy story. It's right to the heart of the matter, if you will. But again, Raphael's building on what happened in the Renaissance. And Madonna in the Meadow, naturalism, understands anatomy, understands a lot of the same things that Da Vinci understood, vis-a-vis the how to paint flesh and things. These babies, they're chubby and they're cuddly, and you would just, they look squishy. They don't look like little statues. They look alive. And so anyway, that was kind of the thing. There's something that happens in these paintings too, Renaissance, high Renaissance. A lot of times they invent flora. By that I mean plant life and other kinds of things, just because they can. And so, for instance, ever see a tree like that? I never needed. And so anyway, but that's what Da Vinci was doing too. He was inventing that entire landscape behind the Mona Lisa. And so this is likely a similar kind of invented landscape, and with really kind of invented flora. This, one of the, probably the most famous of the Raphael paintings, the School of Athens. This is in the Vatican. This is actually commissioned by the Pope to be put in, and you can see, I'll zoom in on some of this. This is what a lot of these artists had to contend with. I showed you the doorway on the Last Supper. You see, there's a doorway here too. They always had to contend with the architecture. Popes would say, I want this mural right here, boom. But you got a door there, forget about it. I want that painting, boom, he did. Philosophy, the School of Athens. And just a few minutes ago, I was talking to you about what the ancient Greeks knew. How their science, their math, their medicine was much, much more advanced than that was previous. Of course, you can argue that the ancient Egyptians were pretty outstanding themselves, and so on. And the Chinese were very, very advanced in ancient times. But as far as the Western culture was concerned, Greeks were everything. And we had this time where it kind of got lost to the ages, as they say. And in the Renaissance, that becomes really almost like it becomes a raison d'etre, reason for being, is to go back and find as much of ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, everything they had. And so that has kind of gotten to a point here where they had really collected quite a lot. This is 1509. School of Athens. This is a homage to the ancient Greeks. And so Plato and Aristotle are central here. And these are all contemporary, early 16th century Italian scholars and notable people and artists and so on. And they get included in the painting as a Greek ancient scholar. And I'll show you this too. Zoom in. And this guy right there, peeking around the corner, that's a self-portrait of Raphael. He includes himself in this pantheon of great people. And so this is Leonardo. He painted Leonardo's portrait in here. And this guy right here, Michelangelo. And so again, all of the orthogonals, everything coming together in that one point perspective that the Italian Renaissance was known for. And you see that center point is right there between Aristotle and Plato. And so here is a list of all of the people that these are supposed to be. And 13, Heraclitus, parentheses, Michelangelo. Number 3, that's over here, I believe, I get that. Believed to be Raphael. Let's see, 14, Plato, Leonardo da Vinci. So anyway, these are all notable people from the Renaissance portrayed as the new school of Athens. And they figured that by this time they had arrived, that they had enough scientific and scholarly and artistic wherewithal, that they were at a level with the ancient Greeks. And so it's kind of a chest beating sort of thing. And that's why the Pope would actually have this painted in his quarters. And so Raphael, Pope Leo X with cardinals. He's doing something here that's kind of something that will recur in the future. We saw some of this with Van Eyck, the man in the red turban, and his face is brightly lit, but everything behind him is dark. That's what's happening here too. That's called tenebrism. That's putting a dark space behind your subject matter to create the illusion of deep space, but not any indication. You're not using any, particularly using any perspective lines on this to fool your eye into believing that this is a real, viable, three-dimensional space. It's not. It's two-dimensional surface. But having that dark area, and that is called tenebrism. It's also called chiaroscuro, which means dark modeling. And there's a guy that'll come later in this century named Caravaggio, and he develops this. where that's the only way he paints is with this dark background, and it becomes known as Caravaggioism. Just saying. But anyway, look, Raphael's got it all down, just like we talked about in the north. They could paint the shine on objects. That's what Hockney was all interested in. How do they do that? As Hockney said, it's very difficult to paint the shine on metallic objects because when you move, the shine moves. It's hard unless you get it. All these things, I got to say, they are problems. Problems that in a lot of ways, I'm not sure that we're aware of in this day and age, because we don't have the job. We're not tasked with creating realism per se. What realism? Click, click. You got it. We got tools for that. We got ways to do things. But then was the artist skill, the artist eye, the trade secrets. And so anyway, yeah, we got the shine, we got look at that velvet robe. Amazing. It's as good, maybe better than anything we saw from Van Eyck or any of them. Like I say, High Renaissance, this is where it all comes together. They put to use everything that they've learned. Raphael, another portrait. Again, we start to see like regular people getting their portraits done. We've seen this for a while. And honestly, this is a pope, but this is not a saint. 100 years prior, we wouldn't have seen this. It would have been vain. Anyway, portraits. And this actually probably looked a lot more realistic 500 years ago. But you can see it's got some cracks and fading and stuff here too. But still maintains a pretty high level of realism. And again, this guy's fur, he's got wrapped around him. It's with Raphael. And see, I'm going to talk about the three of them, the trio: Raphael, Leonardo, and Michelangelo. Leonardo kind of went in and out of Rome and the artistic community per se. Leonardo seemed to be at odds with the Pope a lot, and that might not be too hard to imagine, considering he's got people digging up dead bodies and he's doing all kinds of stuff that people are not supposed to do. And as a matter of fact, Leonardo packs up and moves to the south of France. And in France, they had set up their own pope, actually. There was a time when they were fighting over dominance of the Christian world, of Catholicism. They had a short time where they had the French popes too. And Leonardo went to southern France, and he was the court painter. And so for a number of the French popes, and Leonardo was a little older than all of these guys. Raphael was the young guy in this group. And Raphael did the straight and narrow, stayed in Rome, and he was a very popular person. In fact, he was the rock star of all of this. Everybody loved him. And he died at a young age. He died in 1520. How many of you have heard of the Pantheon in Rome? You guys had ADAH 100. Famous Roman, actually, it's kind of a mortuary. some way, because it's a temple. And Raphael is buried in the Pantheon. And you can go there today and look at a part of the wall that will have Raphael, and his body will be underneath that marble. So when he died, this was like a big event. Because he was so popular, because he was considered during his time probably to be the greatest painter ever. And so that's Raphael, another example, Galatia. And again, these ideas of combining Greek mythology into what was predominantly a Christian religion. We saw that Donatello had done that with the birth of Venus. I mean, with Botticelli doing the birth of Venus. This is really the same theme, but here you got the carriage on the half shell, Venus being pulled by dolphins. But you got these other figures that are half horse, half man, centaurs, and so on. So anyway, that continues. This open embrace of ancient Greek and Roman culture. And Michelangelo, he's a guy who's really kind of moody. See, I get all this. Why do I know that? Giorgio Vasari, he wrote the book. He told us about what these guys did and what they were like. And Michelangelo was kind of a moody sort of guy. And he didn't like a lot of fanfare and stuff, you know, he kind of stayed out of the limelight, but he lived to be really old. And he did a lot of work over a long period of time. And here he is, sculptor and architect. And PIT, that's short for the Pittori, the painter too. So let me see if I can't get this to. Anyway, excuse the bar across the top. There it is. Pieta, 1498, 1500, right at the turn of the century. Marble, the dead Christ, the grieving Virgin Mary. And that's what he did. He was a sculptor and he was a Florentine. And a very good one, as you might see. But this is in the Vatican too. Actually, I talked about the other day, did I tell you when we first got together about how the Mona Lisa is put behind bulletproof glass and all that stuff, and how people would attack? They're afraid people would attack. This got attacked in 1965. Some guy who was obviously mentally ill went into the Vatican and actually had a hammer and broke off somebody's fingers on the Virgin before they were able to stop him. An act of protest. People have done this over the years, defacing art as protest. Anyway. But at any rate, this is his beginning. This is Michelangelo, and this is in the Vatican, but Leonardo was a Florentine. Michelangelo was a Florentine. If you would ask him what his nationality was, he would say he was Florentine. This is a Pietà from 50 years later, over 50 years later. See, it's changed. This is expressive, don't you think? But it's more real. It's more natural. It's how you would expect this. In this, did you say the figures are exaggerated? The color is exaggerated. All of the muscles and the folds and everything, much more exaggerated for emotional effect. I showed you the first slide. It said High Renaissance in Quattrocento, Italy, and mannerism. This is mannerism, where they start to get rid of all of the naturalism in favor of greater expressiveness. Anyway, this is an early, and you see it's in Florence. He was a Florentine. This is Michelangelo's David. We saw Donatello's nude, young David. We saw Verrocchio's David. Now we see Michelangelo's. And this lends itself a lot more to the Greek tradition. This looks like a Greek statue on purpose. And they wanted to be able to do anything that the Greeks did and maybe even try to do it better. And so here is the David. He's not a boy. He's a young man. And he's standing there, that contrapposto, putting all the weight on one leg. That was always, that was what a lot of the Renaissance sculptors did, kind of make their figures more believable. And so he's got his cape thrown over his shoulder, or sling, whatever that is anyway. And he's looking, he's thinking, he's contemplating. He is the guy who is supposed to epitomize brain over brawn. Of course, he is kind of brawny, but the idea of the intellect being superior. You can look at Donatello's and you can say it was about bravery. It's probably about a lot of good luck that that the young David was able to kill the ferocious Goliath. This is in a whole other league. And I'm going to stop there because I got too much other stuff. And so we got this. And I got to make sure I got my screen sharing. Did I logged it out. Oh, there it is. Oh, forgive me. So Pulkit, can you see that? Victor?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, good. Thank you. I want you to just write a couple of paragraphs. This is where we're going to start with researching. I want you to pick an artwork you like from the illustrations in the textbook, volume 2, which is 1400 to the present. That's the textbook we're using. Pick anything and write a paragraph about why you like this work of art. Explain the connections or message you get from the piece. The connection can be purely aesthetic, that you think it's beautiful, or at how it can evoke emotional responses through its imagery. In any cases, your positive response can actually be both. It could spark an emotional response, and you could think it's beautiful as well. So anyway, I want you to take that seriously, because this first quiz is really, I want to see where you guys are. So I'll know how to fashion the rest of the assignments. And so give it a good shot. Give it your best. I want to see where you're at, what you like about what you like. And the second paragraph is explaining the historical context of the work. So I've been trying to do that with everything here, historical context and the artwork itself. So write a paragraph about that. And it doesn't have to be from these first 3 chapters or so. It can be from anything in this book. And you'll find some historical context in the book. Not as much, but the textbook's kind of like a catalog. You know, it gives you some of the highlights and descriptions, but it's what it is. It's what you call a survey. And so anyway, tell me what you know about it, factual, historical. And then finally, list your sources on where you got your information, textbook. If you do this online, give me some hot links. I want to see what you're using, because honestly, I want to see where you're at. And then we can go from there. But I want to see what you're thinking, what you like. And so it's available until next week. But I'd like you to have this done Sunday night, so I can take a read of them before we come in here. But some of you have what are you calling them? Accommodation. What? Accommodation. Accommodations. Thank you, Austin. Yeah, that you get extra time, and so that time between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is your extra time. And if you need the extra time, we'll do it. You're helping me out. I like this. I was thinking to say, except you had words. I love it. So, any questions with any of that? So, we've at least taken a look at all 4 of the native turtles: Donatello, Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo. All right. So I'll see you guys on Wednesday. If the weather holds out, well, if it doesn't, I'll see you online. And